So religion is a kind of countercultural thing, and I think we're often at its best when we're countercultural. When the world's out there talking about anger, we're talking about compassion. When we look at oppression, we're talking about justice. When we're talking about anger, the world's talking about anger, we're talking about love. And I think religion at its best is when we're countercultural. So it feels kind of appropriate at this time of uncertainty and anxiety that we're talking about joy. And so that's what today's service is about. And I love that song that we just sung, I've Got Peace Like a River. And it talks about joy like a fountain, but it also talks about pain like an arrow. Tears like raindrops, strength like a mountain in my soul. It talks about these things being in your soul. And I think it's really interesting when we think about emotions, and I want to explore a little about emotions and how they impact us. And the Irish poet and religious thinker, Padraig Ó Tuama, said, in Irish, when you talk about emotion, you do not say, I am sad. You say, sadness is on me. And I love that because there's an implication of not identifying yourself with the emotion fully. I am not sad, it's just sadness that is on me for a time. Something else will be on me another time, and that is a good thing to recognize. Those are the words of Padraig Ó Tuama. And I love that idea, and if you take the words from that song, not I am angry, rather anger is upon me. Not that I am sad, but rather sadness is upon me. Not that I am joy, but rather joy is upon me. And I think it's even in the lyrics of the hymn, it talks about like. It's not you're saying, I am sad, I've got sadness like. And I think it's really interesting to not define ourselves by any one emotion. I think it's really important. And I think this is more than a linguistic trick. I think it's reframing how we view feelings and how feelings impact who we are and our very essence and our identity. And I think this also can be a limitation of just identifying as any one emotion. For those of us who have experienced grief, we know grief's not any one emotion. There's disappointment, there's sadness, there's anger, there can be guilt in your relationship. There's a whole mixture of emotions tied up in grief that can get mixed up into more than any one emotion. And I think many times, as the reading said earlier on, that Ben just read, you've got railway tracks, and you're often experiencing joy and sorrow at the same time, as this community heard, during the joys and sorrows today. So I think, the idea of framing things around one emotion can be problematic. And we tend to do that when we have check-ins at our meetings. We say check-in and people sit there and reflect. I'm happy. I am fine. They're probably not fine. You can decode that. I was like, I am angry. I was thinking, probably someone really checked in and said, I've got a lot going on right now. I'm really happy about this. I'm really sad about this. I'm really disappointed about this. And by the way, Brian, I'm really mad at you for your last sermon. That would be a real check-in. And so I like the idea of, not thinking of emotions, but this idea of emotions as visitors that come and go. Because some mornings you just wake up and it's not even you get out the wrong side of the bed, you're already mad before you get out of bed. It's just you've got this emotion, you just feel out of sorts. But then, even before you get out of bed, that emotion may have dissipated. But I also want to distinguish emotions from clinical depression, because I know many of us have got severe mental health struggles. Many of us struggle with that. And I want to acknowledge that those of you, what I'm talking about today is not clinical depression. I'm talking about the emotions that we come with the everyday, journey of life. And for those of you who do have mental health struggles, who come to be part of this community, I really value you, and I really know it's an extra effort to be part of a community when you're struggling with mental health. So thank you, I see you, and I really appreciate your presence here. Because I think religious community, when we really think about it, we're like, what is it? I think it's a place that really does deal with mental health. And I don't mean necessarily mental illness. I'm talking about a mental well-being, of which mental illness is a subset. That's what I think religion's about. We are about a spiritual and emotional welfare. And we come for community because we may be feeling lonely. We come for religious education because we feel there's something that we're called to know more about. Sometimes we're searching for something missing in our life, and sometimes we come because we're angry at the world and we feel called for justice. But it's because we're emotionally unsettled, many people come to religious community. It's often said that many people come to religious community because they've got a heart-shaped hole in their body. They've got a heart-shaped hole. We're trying to look for something life-affirming, life-enhancing that we can connect on to raise us up when we're struggling in life, or even just to amplify the joys and celebrations we have in life. And I'm really disappointed with religion and psychology. And that may sound strange coming from a minister, but if you really look at religion and psychology, we talk a lot about struggles. And the Clinical Bible for Psychiatry has thousands of lines on anxiety, depression, shame, guilt, anger, and fear. 5 lines on hope. 1 in joy. And none on compassion, forgiveness, and love. That's psychiatry. That's why I'm disappointed. And then religion's not much better. How often has religion been talked about human depravity and use guilt as a tool, and how often does it use shaming around sin? And that's not helpful. What about joy? Religion should be there amplifying joy. Religion should be in there amplifying love and compassion. Too much of religion is known for what it hates and not enough for what it loves. And I commend Unitarian Universalism because we try and be the love people. We try and make love manifest inside our community and in the wider community. But emotions can be complex, and I always loved, there's a great British comedy show called Outnumbered, and it's about 2 parents with 3 children. That's where the title comes from. I love its improv. There's a great scene in it where the mother turns to the father and says, "Do you think we overfunction or underfunction as parents?" And the father thinks about it and says, "Both, often at the same time." I think we can all feel that way. We've got these emotions, these conflicts, we look at ourselves and we're not quite sure, like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Am I doing this both? And Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, from her great book, Proverbs of Ashes, says, and this was a time when she was in deep despair, she looked through a telescope and saw the planet Jupiter for the first time through a telescope. And reflecting on the moment, she says, "It would be wrong to think of this moment as one in which joy triumphed over despair. Such a view assumes that bad feelings need to be excised or suppressed by stronger, better feelings. Peace or happiness or even survival are imagined to be accomplished by cutting something out or dominating some aspect of the self. Viewing the soul this way internalizes violence." Viewing the soul this way internalizes violence. "I did not defeat negative feelings of anguish and despair because I saw something more lovely or good. That I became able to feel more. My feeling broadened. Pain, sadness, and despair were not eliminated and overcome. I embraced them with a larger heart. My consciousness had been broadened to embrace memories of the religious community, immediate experiences of the world's beauty and the kindness of human beings, and a vivid sense of future possibility." Those are the words of Rebecca Parker, and it's been studied in psychology that negative emotion kind of collapses us. We become very focused because negative emotions, evolutionary, were a response to fear. And so you became very focused, whereas positive emotions like joy broaden us, help us connect to people. So what Rebecca Parker experienced visually is grounded in psychology, that we broaden with positive emotions and we contract and become very single-minded around negative emotions. And sometimes when things seem very negative, something busts through and raises us up and awakens us to joy. And that is this experience when I was a chaplain. I was working with this family, and this 30-year-old daughter was critically ill. And the family, there was about 15 or 20 of them there, from like 4 or 5-year-old children through to grandparents and great-grandparents. And they were all coming in and visiting 2 at a time, the daughter, and she was in ICU, and I was the chaplain on duty, and I was trying to provide comfort to all this family. And the daughter who was ill just kept having, heart kept stopping, and she would get revived, and eventually she died. And I was there comforting one of her sisters. I was down on my knees, and she was sitting down, and I had a hand on her. And she immediately threw up all over me. I was just covered, so kind of taken aback, cleaned myself up, went back to the family, cleaned up the floor. We were in the waiting room at the time. And, I was talking to the daughter just to see how she was doing. She said, "You're a dad, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Why do you say that?" She said, "I just threw up all over you, and you didn't blink an eye." And I couldn't stop myself in that situation. I burst out laughing, and then the whole room started bursting out laughing at that, including the women who had just been sick. And there was a huge release, because there'd been so much tension that day. There had been so much worry that day, and it became a release. And I said, I said, "Well, tell me about the sister." And so she told me about her sister, and then she told this funny story, and then the other families jumped in, and we sat there for about 2 or 3 hours after being through this really intense day, sharing these funny story of this young woman who had just passed. And then you saw how close joy was to the surface of even that really incredibly intense time. And it took that moment of bodily fluid to change it. I'm not sure we'd have ever got there. And I think this sometimes happens. We are often wrestling with those emotions. And I had the same experience when my father died. I was back, and wasn't there when he died, but I was with my mum shortly after it. And I had to go and call my dad's brother. My mum and I were talking. We were really sad. It was a couple of hours afterwards, and I had to go and call my dad's brother in Canada. And I thought, I really don't want to do this. And I'd just flown in from the States, and it was like 11 o'clock in the morning. I said to her, "Mum, I think I'm going to need a glass of wine before I call my Uncle Don." And my mum went, "Oh, I'd love that." So we went and got my dad's favourite bottle of wine, and we drank it. I don't drink wine very often, and we started drinking more than one glass, shall we say. And we started telling these really funny stories about my dad, and we had this incredibly bonding moment that my mum and I remembered. It was incredible. Amidst this sadness and shock and grief, we had this joyous moment of sharing these stories about my dad, thinking he'd really appreciate we're drinking his favourite wine right now. And so I think we always think sometimes we feel embarrassed to express these great emotions, these contrasting emotions. So when we are dealing with grief, it's always good to be attuned and even awakened to joy. And I think we can often do that when there's others there, because we feel if we do this together, it's connecting and it's meaningful. Whereas we're by ourselves, we can often disappear into greater and greater despair. So the UU's focus on lived experience, I know I just point out, that includes bodily functions, or malfunctions in this case. So I'm walking a really dangerous line here, talking about bodily fluids like this. But I think it does, these moments that come into our life and just shake us up and interrupt us from what we are focusing on when we are dealing with negative emotions, can open it up and broaden us up to these greater emotions in our life, the greater experience of what we're going through. So I think it's important to not squander joy, to recognize that we have all these emotions going in with us all the time. There's no one emotion that's dominant at any one time. And I love that reading that Ben read earlier on, because we've got these 2 railway tracks that run parallel. We've got joy and sorrow. We've got anger and compassion, and they run in parallel, but at some point in our life they will merge, and I think they often merge within us, and we have both of those going on with us every day, these contrasts of emotions. And sometimes we prioritize the negative emotions and not realize that positive emotions have just as much value and are probably healthier for us. So I invite you to think of times in your life when you've been in times of hardship, and where's joy been there? Where's compassion been, and where has love been for you? I think we really need to open ourselves up and really be open to that, because they are there. Joy is there if we're open to it. And sometimes just knowing joy can be there or will be there further down the railway tracks can be comforting. And I want to remind us to awaken to the joy of self-love. Because we, as Unitarian Universalists, talk about the inherent worth and dignity of all people, but we sometimes forget all people includes ourselves. Do you show yourself inherent worth and dignity? Do you value yourself? Do you have this sense of self-love, that you are worthy of love and you are lovable and you are loved? That's what the first principle calls. It's not just something out there. It's something out there that we're included in. And Elizabeth M. Jones says, in every life there are certain moments which partake another higher order of experience, peculiarly precious moments which offer serenity, hope, and strength, and which allow us to return to the demands of daily life with renewed vitality and confidence. The growth of a spiritual dimension in each of us, this growth of a spiritual dimension in each of us seems to result in a multiplication and deepening of such moments, both in ourselves and in the world. So I think we can deepen ourselves, that spiritual dimension, and that spiritual dimension to include the positive aspects of life, of love, compassion, and joy. We can be those vehicles to spread love, justice, and joy in the wider world. So I invite us all to awaken to the joy in the hidden places in our lives, not the obvious places, but the hidden places, the times of hardships, the times of grief. And let us be open to it appearing in unexpected times and embrace it. And may we spread joy to the world which badly needs it.